Tonight, as the Financial Intelligence Center freezes bank accounts of PDS, we'll hear from ECG and PDS workers following assurances by government that enough funds from PDS have been secured to pay salaries during the period of the probe into the allegations of fraud.
If the accounts have been frozen, how do they actually pay, even though they are the employers of many of these workers who worked for the month of July and that they are employed, and they are working to ensure that the workers will be paid.
We have details as government continue efforts to take back ECG assets still held by PDS. You want to stay with us for the details, and Top Story is always brought to you by Bond Savings and Loans. Your success, our passion, also brought to you by Gasem Cement the Nation. Build a Vodafone. The future is exciting. Ready.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And tonight, as the PDS ECG saga rages on, it is coming to light and attention is now being focused on what happens to the workers. In the midst of all the confusion surrounding the guarantees that have become questionable, tainted with alleged fraud, which a government delegation is set to probe further in Qatar next Tuesday, it is emerging that the Financial Intelligence Center has frozen the accounts, the bank accounts of PDS. And government says it is from that account that is confident that the workers who work for PDS will be paid. Remember, the PDS's concession arrangement has been suspended. And we're also learning tonight that efforts are still underway from the Energy Commission side to formally revoke the asset holding license of PDS. So what it is currently is that a PDS, although its concession arrangement has been suspended, still holds and controls the $18 billion assets of ECG. They had 30 days to respond to the Energy Commission's move to also deprive them of the license to control those assets. We are going to get into that detail for you tonight, and also be hearing for the very first time from the Public Utilities Workers Union, who are beginning to speak now on the issues that have unfolded and how particularly it affects workers there. I want you to listen to Kojo Ponkruma, who is Information Minister, explaining the processes government is going through right now to take these assets that are still in PDS possession back to the ECG. There are procedural issues that the Energy Commission is currently going through to make that happen. He explains.
My brief is that they're in the process of suspending that one as well, and that they have written to PDS that in accordance with the law, they have 30 days within which they'll be suspending that, and unless PDS shows cause why that should not be suspended. The brief I have is that has been communicated to PDS, but in the interim, what is happening is that PDS and ECG officials are working to ensure that ECG has access to all of those sites, and that those sites are not compromised.
Isn't it curious that we did not do that immediately, considering the fact that PDS is now a body under investigation, which cannot supply power, but they still hold their assets, which are worth about $18 billion?
There's nothing wrong with being curious about that, but the understanding that we have from the Energy Commission is that that's what the law requires them to do, and that is what they are doing. Remember, we have said that everything that is being done must be done in accordance with the law and the various agreements. So you need a fine-tooth comb to go through it without emotions, but having these very difficult conversations with the various actors, the Americans, our colleagues at PDS, the ECG team, the lawyers, and making the point that in this particular instance, this is what the law says, and therefore this is what must be done. The brief we have is that is the procedure that the Energy Commission has to use, and it's going in accordance with that procedure. But importantly, or most importantly, in the interim, ECG and PDS officials are working to ensure that ECG has access to those sites and that those sites are not compromised.
Well, so what happens to the thousands of workers that PDS took on from ECG in this period where ECG's concession arrangement has been suspended and their accounts frozen? Let's listen to Kojo Ponkroma explaining what will happen to these workers in this 30-day period. The government has announced that the investigations will be carried out and a decision taken at the end of that process, whether to completely revoke the concession arrangement or reinstate PDS.
It is my understanding that during this intervening period, this 30-day period when a proper determination of the matter is being made, both the ECG and the PDS side are engaging on who has access to the resources and therefore who has to pay them. You do know that as at now, the Financial Intelligence Center, in fact, even before we made the announcement on Wednesday night, one of the very first things that had to be done was to get the Financial Intelligence Center to freeze all the accounts of PDS that were holding cash and resources that had been collected from subscribers to electricity. So those accounts have been frozen. If the accounts have been frozen, how do they actually pay, even though they are the employers of many of these workers who worked for the month of July under their employ? That is the engagement between ECG and PDS and the other agencies that are sitting at the table. And they are working to ensure that the workers will be paid from where the resources are available during this intervening period. I think even the more difficult one is the month of August, during which period this investigation is ongoing, during which period where the workers have not exactly been transferred to ECG, they are workers of PDS. They will still be working. Their accounts have been frozen, but a mechanism must be worked out to ensure that they are paid. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a very technical and sensitive exercise that is ongoing. But the important thing is that all the parties at the table are clear in their mind that these things must be done and are finding ways by which it will be done.
So when are we getting daylights on this issue? Is it going to affect the July salaries when they will be paid, for instance?
We have no expectation that it should affect that.
So your word to every PDS worker now is that they will receive their July salaries on time with no delay?
The brief I have is that it should not affect distribution of power. It should not affect people's salaries. Yes, it is a sensitive, difficult exercise at this time when, the cash assets have been frozen and they have not been transferred to ECG at this point in time. I think we can all admit that. But that is only a process they have to go through to ensure that the cash assets can be released for payment of salaries for July and for August while we are going through this process.
Kojo Ponkroma, Information Minister. Let me bring in now the Public Utilities Workers Union General Secretary, Mr. Michael Nyantichi. Mr. Nyantichi, thank you for your time here on Top Story.
Yeah, good evening.
I'm sure you just listened to Kojo Ponkroma assuring that your salaries, worker salaries will be paid. The PDS accounts have been frozen. Your reaction to that?
Well, good evening to your listeners. I think the issue of freezing the accounts of PDS is a little unfortunate because it's like you introducing issues that are not clearly defined in the lease and assignment agreement, where you say you have suspended the contract arrangement. You are going through a process. I think the whole arrangement of freezing the accounts is not just limited to only the payment of salaries. There are issues relating to the day-to-day running of the company. Because as these issues are raging on, every day workers must go to the field. There must be fuel for the vehicles to run, other resources that are needed for operations. So are they going to make available funds for any of these activities as they fall due? This is a going concern. Fortunately, one thing we can say with some degree of appreciation is the fact that since PDS took over, payment of workers' salaries have really been very encouraging. So as we speak, the July salary for staff have been paid over a week now. So that is no more an issue. As you mentioned, the critical issue is that of August, where this period, the PDS is not going to have access to the funds. What about the other activities related to day-to-day work of the supply and distribution of energy to various customers? If staff have to go to the field, if materials are needed, these are arrangements we thought that should have been properly outlined before giving out any such orders of freezing accounts and those things, so that things run virtually seamless and there's no break as to when materials run out, what happens now.
On that point, Kojo Oponkrama was asked that question today, and he says that it is his brief that the decision to suspend PDS, freezes assets, etc., will not and should not affect power distribution. Do you have any? When you listen to that assurance, does it allay your fears?
No. Well, it's one thing just making this averment that it will not affect operations. But what are the practical measures that have been put in place as we speak today? Because supplies are being used day in and out. In the interim that you have put the accounts virtually out of the reach of PDS, is it ECG now that is going to be giving access to the funds and then start procuring the things that are needed for the running of the distribution business? I thought these ones should have been clearly outlined before coming out with any announcement, because you should know this is a company that is not running. You are not stopping for some of these things to be done, because every day since this press statement came out last Tuesday, the company business must be going on. Workers must be going out. Supplies have to be used. And these are not things that you can say you have accumulated for a long period. When fuel runs out, where are you getting the money immediately to go and procure? So I think a lot of things need to be clarified. And again, we still believe that many of these things, we are running it in some manner which perhaps if we take our time and outline the challenges involved, and we are clear where we are going, we can avoid many of these confusions. Because it's not only issues affecting just the supplies or the apprehension and uneasiness among staff. Now, they are staff of PDS. Are they going to take new offers from ECG? Are they being seconded to ECG? What are the arrangements? What measures are in place? Now, even we are getting reports that some places, facilities that PDS have some arrangement with them in terms of medical supply and those things, they are beginning to ask staff to pay cash because they are not sure of the state of PDS. These are all things that can really affect the morale and psyche of workers.
But that's an interesting point you make, that already some institutions that deal with PDS are beginning to hesitate in dealing with PDS staff because you're not sure of PDS, the status of PDS.
Yes.
But when it comes to the salaries, you seem confident that the workers are okay. At least they've been paid July already, and August is the period where the investigations will be carried out. You seem to have confidence that shouldn't be an issue.
Well, that's why we don't know what arrangements are in place now. Once the accounts have been frozen, are they going to ask ECG to take over those accounts, or are they going to ring fence some money that at the end of the period they will say that, okay, whilst we are doing this, pay the salary of the workers? Because so far PDL has enabled or created a situation where workers' salary are paid very early.
Let me ask you this. Since 2-3 days ago when news broke that government is suspending or has suspended the PDS concession arrangement because of the suspicion of fraud in how they took over the ECG power distribution, and on the back of the suspicious guarantees that were submitted. We haven't really heard from the workers. You represent them, the Public Utilities Workers Union. What's the reaction of the workers to all this?
No, workers are also in this state of confusion as to what is really happening. Now, are we workers of PDS? Are we workers of ECG? Who is really calling the shots or giving directives on what to do? All we have sent some messages to our members is to remain calm, focus on day-to-day activities. But for how long, since there are questions being asked, if resources are running out, what are the arrangements in place? And these are genuine questions people are asking. And so far, unfortunately, we haven't gotten any clear message from the government side or the ministry. There haven't been any communication from ECG nor even PDS management. And it creates this unhealthy environment. You go to work and you don't really know exactly who is in charge.
Just to clarify, how many workers have been affected by this?
Oh, ECG at least had about over 6,000, let's say about 6,200 staff, just a rough estimate. And the majority of the staff have been transferred to PDS. So PDS, at least over 6,000 of these workers are with PDS now.
Tell me, I know the Public Utilities Workers Union, you raised questions and concerns about the concession arrangement before it was finalized with PDS. Are you surprised at the way things have turned out now?
Well, not really. Some of us who have followed this process a bit keenly from 2013 thereabouts, when these things were ongoing, knew that the way we were rushing this process, and we as a nation seem to have closed our minds and ears to any other alternative, and even the speed with which we are carrying out some of these assignments, and a major procurement activity like giving the whole assets of ECG to a private entity, the speed with which we're doing things, I'm not surprised that we are getting this kind of issues cropping up, because we've been asking the question, why the haste when we haven't verified all the things that needed to be verified before transfer? And these were things which were clearly spelled out in the lease and assignment agreement and also in the request for proposals. So couldn't we have just made sure that these key securities we ensure we have verified, cross-checked, double-checked before we hand over the assets? And now in midstream, now we are coming back to say that, from our due diligences, we are hearing or seeing A, B, and C supposedly or alleged to be fraudulent activities. I think we should have taken our time and do things the right way. But the ungodly haste that this whole process was being taken through, for me, has accounted for many of these things that are evolving. And we were made to believe so many things that NIDA said, the concessionaire is bringing this quantum of money every year. They are going to invest $100 million into the operations of the distribution business. Today, we don't know whether this so-called money they talk about, anything has been invested.
Let me ask you this. Where do you lay the blame as workers? Is it MIDA, Parliament, ECG management, government? Primarily, where do you lay the blame?
I think it's a collective blame we will put on the key actors that were involved in this. I would not want to hold brief, but I think from the way the process was going, if there is one party that we cannot allocate any of the blame to, it's ECG management, because they raised so many of these issues, but MIDA created the impression that as if ECG was just against the whole process and is only determined to scuttle it. So when real concerns were being raised, nobody wanted to even listen and cross-check. And government, with its agents like MIDA and IFC, who are also transaction advisors, cannot escape from this situation that we find ourselves in. When you go to MIDA has a board which takes the final decisions on many of these things, and this board is made up of a number of ministers who are sitting on this MIDA board. So they cannot say that they don't know what was going on, or nobody was aware that A, B, and C have not been concluded and were still being pushed or railroaded into this arrangement.
And the point you made about ECG is again supported by the facts, because it is ECG that eventually spotted this alleged fraud. They wrote, if they had not written that letter because they suspected something and they wanted to verify, we would not have discovered this the time we did. Finally, Mr. Nyantuchi, what should happen now with where we are to resolve this matter? There have been several suggestions from people about interdicting people, cancelling the concession arrangement, etc. As far as the workers are concerned, what do you want to see happen?
No, I think that, we made our position very clear that we believe that ECG, if government has taken a critical look and if we see just to ensure that the company reforms and operate efficiently, there were other alternatives that we could have adopted, but now that is water under the bridge. Government, and because the money we're looking at $500 million, we wanted to lay our hands on that money by hook or crook. So every deadline we were trying to bend backwards to make sure that we reach whatever deadlines that have been set. Now we have gotten to this place. All that is important now is this supposedly fraudulent guarantee. Is it something that can be cured? Is it something that if time had been given to PDS, because it's a guarantee, PDS has not taken any assets out of the jurisdiction. These assets, unfortunately, by the arrangement, 51% of the shareholders are Ghanaians. Couldn't we have taken our time and made sure that if the guarantee that has been provided is defective, can we give PDS time to rectify? Is there a possibility if PDS doesn't show that it has the resources to be able to provide the needed guarantee, then that becomes a different scenario. But we are acting as if in a James Bond movie, if we don't do some substitute, everything is going to vanish into thin air. And I think the approach to this whole arrangement, for me, I see it like some Rambo-style kind of operation, and I'm not sure this is the way we have to handle a transaction of this nature.
Clarify for me, is it your position that you think suspending the concession arrangement like government had done is a bit rushed, and that is a bit too high-handed in dealing with the matter?
No, with the letter I've even read from the agreement, I stand to be corrected, but I don't even know whether suspension of the contract is one of the provisions in the agreement. And I think these are matters maybe PDS and their lawyers can also raise, because I know that there are clauses for termination. If you are not terminating, you are not triggered the termination clause. Where from this animal of suspension, if it's not provided in the agreement? And I believe that once the key issue at stake is that of the guarantee, and there's a guarantee for the BSP and also the lease and assignment, I don't think that overnight PDS will run away with the assets of ECG, and then we say we can't find them, and therefore it's something that we quickly have to act in a manner like this. I believe that if PDS attention was drawn, and then every contract makes provision for if there is a breach, then can this breach be rectified? Is it substantial or material such that it is not that we can be rectified? So far, from the things that are emerging, I don't really think, or I don't see where PDS have acted fraudulently, because it's coming out that the demands that they had to pay to the insurance for this guarantee to be issued on the part of PDS, they paid. Yes, their agents' actions, they cannot completely run away from it, but then at least it doesn't create the perception that this is a company that is acting with a fraudulent intention. So I believe that if we take our time as a nation, unless we think that where we have reached, we don't want to continue with this concession, and so we want to find a way to end the agreement. And so we have seen one opportunity, and we want to just stand on it and then bring the whole arrangement. Then we need to go through a proper process and the procedure, which is anchored not just in law, but within the provisions of the contract.
Of the contract itself. Mr. Nyantuchi, I'm grateful that you join us. Mr. Nyantuchi is, Michael Nyantuchi is the General Secretary of the Public Utilities Workers Union. And that last bit, he says that, well, it's one of those things that you were not expecting the workers to say, but he's fundamentally saying he hasn't seen anything yet to convince him that PDS has acted fraudulently, and this decision may have been rushed to suspend. Parliament is just another story we're following for you tonight. Parliament is set to rise today, and there's a lot of activity in the House, and minorities already raising concerns about the more than $1 billion city loans, that are going to be pushed through in the next few hours without proper scrutiny. My colleague Parker Wilson is in Parliament for us. Parker, why are the minority guys concerned about this?
Right. So, Evans, for them, it is quite surprising that when those meetings began, in fact, they had a number of minutes or time on their hands, but unfortunately, members of the majority failed to present all the loans agreement that they need to peruse before the House at the time. But now that the House is rising today, they've seen quite a number of them, almost about 9 loan agreements that they would have to peruse within just about 2 hours. And they think that when this happens, they do not get the adequate time and opportunity to examine the document, the clause by clause, and everything that would give them the opportunity to ensure that at least we are going in for the right deal. So he is only admonishing and urging the members of the majority that perhaps they should try as much as possible to bring in the loan agreement on time, so that at least they can peruse them before the House rises.
And Parker, one of the key things that we're expecting to happen today is the approval of the new the increased taxes on the communication service tax and also the energy sector levies. Has that happened already?
Not yet. As I speak to you, because of the number of loan agreements that the finance committee would have to go through, they are still in the meeting going through some of them, because some of the papers were later. In fact, some of the loan agreements were just brought to Parliament just around 11 a.m. and they are expected to make sure that they go through it, presented their report to the House for a debate before the final approval. So that's what they are doing at the moment. They are still in the meeting. So we are told that just around 6:30, they will be on the floor of the House and submit their report for the House to approve it.
I'm grateful for that quick update from Parliament. And once all that is concluded, we'll bring the latest to you from the House as it breaks today. Many of the MPs are going to face stiff competition in their constituencies. Primaries are coming up, and so today they must take a break from passing laws to focus on staying as members of Parliament. We'll keep an eye on that and bring the details as and when we have it. Ghana Connect starts now.